Did Jamie Raskin just destroy FBI Director Kash Patel's entire narrative on live television? In a stunning, meticulously calculated confrontation, Raskin cornered Patel with a single, devastating question that left the entire hearing room utterly speechless. Jamie Raskin just cornered FBI Director Kash Patel on live television, delivering an 8-word sentence that completely and irreparably shattered Patel's official, carefully constructed narrative. Welcome back to the channel. What unfolded just moments ago in the hallowed halls of the House Judiciary Committee reduced a sprawling 17-month-long justification for systematically purging the Bureau into one inescapable, undeniable reality. Raskin, operating with the cold precision of a seasoned prosecutor, looked Patel dead in the eye and said, "You fired them for your phone records." He did not fire them for alleged, documented misconduct. He did not fire them for improper investigative steps, and he certainly did not fire them for any grand, sweeping abusive process or egregious violation of civil liberties, as he had so frequently claimed. In a matter of seconds, Raskin completely dismantled all the carefully curated phrases and focus group tested talking points. Patel had been aggressively broadcasting in every single public statement, cable news interview, and press release since the massive Reuters bombshell dropped just 11 days prior. Those 8 incredibly precise words violently connected Patel's hollow public excuses to the documented, undeniable reality of his actions, leaving the embattled FBI director with exactly one available, terrifying response. The response Patel ultimately chose in that pressurized moment is exactly why seasoned political analysts and legal scholars across the spectrum are already calling this specific, viral clip the single most damaging congressional exchange of his entire, highly controversial tenure. What he said was somehow, remarkably, even worse than complete silence. He desperately claimed that Raskin's characterization was factually inaccurate. In response to this weak deflection, Jamie Raskin did not raise his voice. He simply read Patel's own documented words right back to him, springing a trap from which there was no conceivable escape. Raskin, holding the floor with unshakable authority, quoted the exact, verbatim statement Patel had hastily issued to Reuters on the morning of February 25th, where an infuriated Patel publicly described the lawful subpoena of his own personal phone records as both outrageous and deeply alarming. Raskin then leaned into the microphone and asked a deeply profound question that simply had no rhetorical or logical escape route. If the fundamental act of the FBI obtaining his basic phone records while he was a private citizen during a massive federal investigation was truly so outrageous, what do you call the sitting FBI director immediately firing the very seasoned agents who conducted that highly classified investigation on the exact same day he found out about it? You absolutely need to stick around until the very end of this comprehensive breakdown, because what Representative Raskin methodically executed over the following 7 agonizing minutes was not merely a standard, run-of-the-mill congressional hearing exchange. It was the absolute, systematic, and brutal destruction of every single legal, ethical, and procedural defense Patel had ever dared to offer for what is now being recognized as the most openly retaliatory, politically motivated mass firing in the entire, storied history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If you are new to this channel and want to stay updated on this explosive situation, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your bell notifications. Jamie Raskin is the highly influential ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, a body which holds vital, primary oversight authority over the FBI and the broader Department of Justice, and the masterful, inescapable legal trap he set on the permanent congressional record today will undoubtedly serve as the rock-solid legal foundation for every single subsequent whistleblower challenge and wrongful termination lawsuit regarding these highly controversial firings. Let us briefly rewind the clock to establish the crucial timeline. February 25th, 2026. This was the exact day when Reuters officially broke the story, reporting that during the Biden administration, the FBI had lawfully subpoenaed the toll records of both Kash Patel and current White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles while they were operating as private citizens during the years 2022 and 2023. To fully grasp the sheer absurdity of Patel's outrage, it is absolutely crucial to understand exactly what toll records are, and more importantly, what they are not. Toll records are simply basic, metadata level logs indicating which specific phone numbers called other specific numbers, including the precise date, the exact time of the connection, and the total duration of those individual calls. They do not contain a single syllable of actual content. They do not include covert audio recordings, and they do not provide investigators with any text messages or encrypted communications. This specific type of elementary phone log is the exact, fundamental kind of investigative record that federal investigators routinely, legally, and aggressively subpoena every single day across the country without ever requiring a federal judge's prior approval or a specialized warrant. It is a completely standard, universally accepted, and entirely unremarkable practice in any serious, sprawling criminal investigation. Furthermore, the context makes Patel's shock even less believable. Patel was not just loosely or tangentially connected to the subject of this massive investigation. He was actually legally compelled to formally testify before a federal grand jury way back in 2022. And he was even granted limited, formalized immunity from prosecution in direct exchange for providing that critical testimony. Therefore, he has fully and completely known since at least 2022 that his name, his actions, and his communications were caught up in the sprawling web of this high-stakes investigation. Yet, on the exact same day that Reuters published its explosive, headline-grabbing story, Patel hastily issued his incredibly angry, defensive statement, publicly calling the routine subpoena outrageous. Within mere hours of that defensive statement going public and dominating the news cycle, the FBI abruptly and mercilessly began severing the careers of its own dedicated people. By the very next morning, February 26th, the bureaucratic bloodbath was fully underway. More than a dozen highly trained veteran FBI agents, brilliant intelligence analysts, and essential, irreplaceable support staff had been abruptly and callously terminated without warning. Every single one of these dismissed individuals had previously worked tirelessly on Special Counsel Jack Smith's high-stakes, immensely sensitive classified documents investigation. To make matters even more alarming for national security experts, many of these fired individuals were specifically pulled from the ranks of CI-12, which is the FBI's deeply clandestine, elite counterintelligence unit primarily responsible for aggressively tracking and neutralizing dangerous Iranian intelligence operations on American soil. These are individuals who require millions of dollars in specialized training and decades of field experience to do their jobs effectively. They were not fired for any documented, proven misconduct. They were not terminated because a thorough internal investigation found any actual wrongdoing, bias, or legal overreach. They lost their entire livelihoods, their pensions, and their distinguished careers simply because Kash Patel read in the newspaper that his basic toll records had been subpoenaed, and in a fit of apparent vindictiveness, he chose to instantly fire the dedicated, highly skilled professionals who were merely doing their assigned, lawful jobs. In immediate, furious response to this purge, the official FBI Agents Association, a historically conservative and highly measured organization, strongly and unequivocally condemned the mass firings. They explicitly and publicly stated that these rash actions severely and dangerously weakened the Bureau by stripping away critical, irreplaceable expertise and massively destabilizing the dedicated workforce, ultimately putting the entire nation at a much greater risk of foreign and domestic threats. This was not a partisan, carefully spun political statement drafted by opportunistic Democrats in Congress. It was a dire, screaming, red alert warning from the apolitical, professional association representing the brave men and women of the FBI themselves. Representative Raskin, recognizing the undeniable power of this condemnation, had this exact, blistering statement memorized down to the syllable long before he ever walked through the heavy wooden doors of that hearing room. The tension in the room was already palpable. The House Judiciary Committee session had already been running for an exhausting hour and a half when Jamie Raskin finally, patiently, got his turn to speak. Up until that exact moment, Director Patel had been delivering a very standard, highly polished, and thoroughly rehearsed performance for the cameras. He maintained a casually relaxed posture, leaning back in his leather chair. He provided crisp, seemingly authoritative answers, and he perfectly utilized the practiced, rhythmic cadence of a man who firmly, arrogantly believed that simply repeating a flimsy justification enough times on national television would automatically make it true in the eyes of the public. He had intentionally, repeatedly, used the highly specific, ominous-sounding phrase, prohibited case files, 4 completely different times in his lengthy responses to friendly, accommodating Republican committee members who had gently, predictably offered him the open floor to freely elaborate on his preferred narrative. Patel had confidently and aggressively described the routine conduct of the FBI under the previous Biden administration as an unprecedented, systemic abuse of investigative authority. He had continuously cited his own deeply personal experience of discovery, dramatically recounting the shock of finding out about the legal subpoena through the mainstream press as supposedly concrete, undeniable evidence of just how deeply and nefariously the records had been deliberately buried from proper oversight. By every visible, superficial metric in that grand congressional chamber, Kash Patel looked exactly like a man who had completely decided that the narrative was safely and securely under his absolute control. And then, shifting the entire dynamic of the hearing, Jamie Raskin calmly, quietly opened a simple manila folder containing exactly 3 sheets of paper. "Director Patel, I want to talk about toll records," Raskin stated, his voice cutting clearly through the low murmur of the vast room. The atmospheric shift inside the grand hearing room was absolutely immediate and chillingly noticeable. Patel's right hand quickly, almost involuntarily, moved off the polished wooden table and dropped down to his knee, while the high-powered attorney sitting directly behind his left shoulder, nervously and loudly, uncapped a silver pen. Patel's outward, physical composure technically held together for the cameras, but the underlying, heavy stillness in his demeanor changed its quality entirely, much like the exact, unsettling way still water shifts on a molecular level in the exact microsecond, right before it violently begins to boil over. Raskin's tone was incredibly measured, devoid of any unnecessary emotion. It was the distinct, terrifyingly calm voice he purposefully uses when he knows, with absolute certainty, that he already holds all the winning cards in his hand. He was not loud, he was not pounding the table, and he was not being needlessly theatrical for the late-night news clips. He was just surgically, devastatingly precise. "Director, on the morning of February 25th, you issued a highly publicized public statement regarding the lawful subpoena of your phone records. I have that exact statement right here," Raskin said, slowly holding up a single, crisp printed page for the entire room to clearly see. "I'm going to read you a specific portion of your own words. Quote, it is outrageous and deeply alarming that the previous FBI leadership secretly subpoenaed my own phone records, along with those of now White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, using flimsy pretexts and burying the entire process in prohibited case files designed to evade all oversight." End quote. Raskin deliberately, smoothly, set the page down flat on his desk, peered over his glasses, and asked, "Is that an accurate, verbatim quotation of your official public statement?" Patel, swallowing hard, nodded once and verbally confirmed into the microphone, "Yes, Congressman, that is accurate." Raskin softly replied, "Good," and without missing a single beat, immediately picked up the second document from his sparse folder. Within 24 hours of issuing that specific, highly defensive public statement, you bypassed standard protocol and immediately terminated more than a dozen veteran FBI employees. Most of these dedicated public servants had previously worked directly on Special Counsel Jack Smith's highly sensitive classified documents investigation. "Is that factual timeline accurate?" Raskin asked, his voice steady and relentless. Patel's jaw noticeably shifted, a muscle feathering under his cheek, before he carefully, defensively replied that major personnel decisions of that magnitude were only made following a comprehensive, high-level review of the specific, troubling circumstances that Raskin was currently referencing. Raskin nodded exactly once, a sharp, dismissive movement, and simply repeated the most damning part of the testimony. "A comprehensive review that you somehow miraculously completed within 24 hours. He didn't even bother to phrase it as a formal question. He just let the devastating, entirely implausible timeline hang in the quiet, electrified air of the chamber. If you are still watching this detailed breakdown, please hit the like button right now and drop a comment below, because in just 45 seconds of masterful interrogation, Jamie Raskin successfully and permanently established on the record what Kash Patel had spent the last 11 grueling days desperately, publicly trying to avoid stating out loud under oath. The sheer personal discovery of his own subpoenaed phone records in the news was the explicit, undeniable, and soul-triggering reason those devastating mass firings actually happened. The incredibly tight 2-4-hour timeline is absolutely not disputed by anyone. And the direct causal connection between the press release and the terminations is no longer disputed. The only remaining monumental legal question is whether suddenly and vindictively firing dedicated, highly trained federal employees simply for legally conducting a standard, authorized federal investigation using completely routine, universally accepted tools is actually lawful. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you personally think the official FBI Agents Association is correct in their assessment that these clearly retaliatory firings were entirely illegal and a breach of power? Raskin then methodically picked up his third document. Director, I want to ask you very specifically about the legal nature and functional utility of toll records, because I strongly believe there may be a widespread, manufactured misunderstanding in the public coverage of this critical issue, a misunderstanding that you yourself have greatly benefited from, and I want to formally, permanently correct that public record right here, right now, in this hearing. He held up the crisp document, which he noted was a clear, unambiguous, one-page summary of the established federal law governing the proper, routine use of grand jury subpoenas for simple telephone records. Raskin eloquently and firmly clarified for the official congressional record that toll records strictly and only show the basic timing, the duration, and the numerical recipients of phone calls. They are absolutely not the private content of the conversations. They are not wiretapped audio recordings. They do not contain text messages, and they are not typed transcripts of private discussions. A federal law enforcement agency operating under standard Department of Justice guidelines is completely permitted to lawfully obtain these basic toll records via a standard grand jury subpoena without ever needing to seek a federal judge's prior approval or jumping through the hoops of a Title III wiretap warrant, as long as it is a foundational part of a legitimate, active criminal investigation. Raskin lowered the paper and locked eyes with Patel, his gaze unyielding. You have fully known since the year 2022 that you had been formally summoned before that specific federal grand jury, and you were subsequently given formal, limited immunity from prosecution by the Department of Justice. You were a widely known, legally acknowledged witness in a massive, highly active federal criminal investigation regarding the conduct of a former president of the United States. He leaned forward and then delivered the absolute fatal blow. So, Director, is it your official, sworn position before this committee that the FBI agents who lawfully subpoenaed your basic toll records as part of a completely legitimate federal investigation, an investigation of which you were already a fully acknowledged cooperating witness, acted improperly or illegally simply by doing their jobs? Patel's posture shifted uncomfortably, the earlier relaxed confidence entirely evaporating from his frame. He stammered slightly and attempted to fiercely argue that the specific toll records in question were obtained through shadowy, hidden processes that, in his own personal, highly subjective assessment, went far beyond what was legally appropriate or procedurally necessary for the scope of the investigation as it was broadly understood at that specific point in time. Before Patel could spin further into his tangled web of bureaucratic buzzwords and deflections, Raskin sharply, decisively cut him off with the exact brilliant sentence that is currently going massively viral across every single social media platform on the internet. Director, you were a federal grand jury witness. They legally subpoenaed your call log. That is exactly, fundamentally, what federal grand jury investigations do. They subpoena call logs to establish timelines. Raskin paused, allowing a moment of heavy, dramatic effect to wash over the silent room. Tell me, Director, was it outrageous and deeply alarming when the exact same FBI legally subpoenaed Paul Manafort's phone records? Was it a gross violation of civil liberties when they subpoenaed Michael Cohen's records? Was it an unprecedented abuse of power when they subpoenaed the routine records of literally any other private citizen connected to a primary subject under an active, sprawling federal investigation? Or, Director Patel, is it only outrageous and deeply alarming when it happens to be your personal records? Patel's mouth opened slightly, hovering in the air for a second, and then tightly, completely closed. His lead attorney, sitting rigidly behind him, slowly and visibly put his silver pen down flat on the mahogany table, likely realizing in that exact, dreadful second that this brilliantly constructed, A logically flawless question had absolutely no survivable political or legal answer. If Patel answered yes, and foolishly admitted it was only outrageous when it explicitly involved his own personal records, he would be instantly confessing on live national camera to explicitly using his immense, newly acquired governmental power for naked personal retaliation and vengeance. If he answered no, and stubbornly claimed it is always inherently outrageous for the government to do this, he would be actively, absurdly arguing that completely routine, foundational grand jury subpoenas for simple phone logs inherently violate the constitutional civil liberties of every single witness in every single federal investigation in the country, an incredibly radical, legally illiterate position that would instantly invalidate and paralyze decades of standard, entirely legal law enforcement practice across the entire nation. Utterly trapped in a logical vise of his own making, Patel ultimately chose neither option. He weakly deflected, vaguely claiming once again that the highly specific, nuanced circumstances of exactly how those particular records were supposedly obtained, along with the internal DOJ oversight mechanisms that were allegedly, mysteriously bypassed, made this particular personal situation vastly distinct from standard, normal investigative practice. Refusing to let Patel off the hook or accept this meaningless word salad, Raskin opened his manila folder one last, decisive time and deliberately pulled out a fourth document that he had not previously mentioned or referenced. Director, what I hold in my hand is the official, publicly released statement from the FBI Agents Association regarding your unprecedented, sweeping mass terminations, Raskin stated, his voice resonating with deep, moral authority. He read directly, emphatically from the printed page. These incredibly rash actions severely weaken the Bureau by immediately stripping away critical, irreplaceable counterintelligence expertise and massively destabilizing our dedicated workforce, fundamentally undermining the essential trust in executive leadership and severely jeopardizing the Bureau's critical ability to meet its future recruitment goals, ultimately putting the entire nation at a significantly greater risk of harm. Raskin set the document down heavily, the slap of the paper echoing faintly. That incredibly powerful, damning statement was not issued by political pundits. It was issued by the solemn professional association representing the very agents you just abruptly fired. The dedicated, hard-working people whose long, distinguished careers you suddenly, vindictively ended. The patriots whose vast, irreplaceable institutional knowledge you completely and recklessly destroyed in a single afternoon. They did not describe their own diligent, lawful hard work as outrageous. They described your incredibly rash, retaliatory response to their lawful work as an action that is directly weakening the Federal Bureau of Investigation and purposefully putting this entire nation at a much greater risk. Raskin then looked directly across the dais at Patel with a piercing, unblinking intensity. I have one final crucial question for you today, Director. It is a very simple, binary yes or no question. And I want you to think incredibly carefully before you open your mouth to answer it, because your high-priced attorneys are watching you very closely from behind, and I know that they fully, completely understand exactly what this specific question permanently establishes in the official, legally binding congressional record. Raskin paused, intentionally letting the immense gravity of the historic moment completely settle over the breathless room. Did any single one of the dozens of agents you abruptly fired that day receive a formal, documented finding of misconduct, a completed administrative review conclusion, or any formal legal determination whatsoever that they had actually violated internal FBI policy or federal law before you terminated their employment and ruined their careers? The heavy, suffocating silence that immediately followed was absolutely agonizing to witness. It lasted for a full, uninterrupted 18 seconds. 18 seconds in a highly publicized, nationally televised congressional hearing is not merely a conversational pause. It is an eternity. It is a glaringly loud, legally devastating answer all on its own. It is the glaring, profound absence of a simple yes that absolutely, fundamentally confirms to everyone watching that the answer is a resounding no. Patel's hands were pressed entirely flat and rigid against the table, the knuckles turning slightly white, while his lead attorney had leaned all the way forward in his chair, getting so uncomfortably close that the main television broadcast camera positioned on Patel's right side clearly caught the panicked, urgent movement in the frame. Patel made the smallest, barely perceptible negative gesture with his head, signaling a silent, desperate no communication to his hovering lawyer. He knew, with sinking dread, that he had to answer this impossible, career-defining question entirely by himself under oath. Finally, breaking the excruciating silence, Patel spoke. "Senator, the ultimate personnel decisions in question were ultimately made following a rapid, director-level assessment of the specific, troubling circumstances that resulted in the unauthorized and completely undisclosed subpoena of my personal, private communications." Raskin, having none of the bureaucratic evasion, immediately fired back with just 3 sharp, uncompromising words: yes or no. The massive, ornate room went completely, unnervingly still, because everyone present intimately understood that yes or no was the absolute only factual avenue left in that entire sprawl. Either there were actual, documented, formal misconduct findings on paper, in which case the abrupt, shocking firings might have had at least a thin, legitimate procedural basis, or there were not, which would undeniably mean the sitting director of the FBI callously terminated more than a dozen dedicated, highly trained federal employees with absolutely no formal determination of any wrongdoing whatsoever, armed with absolutely nothing but his own angry, personal discovery that they had simply legally done their assigned jobs investigating him. Patel looked down at the grain of the wooden table, unable to meet Raskin's eyes. When he finally opened his mouth to speak, his voice carried the distinct, hollow, defeated quality of a man who has carefully, painfully chosen the answer that does the least amount of immediate legal damage, while fully, deeply knowing that both available choices are politically and professionally catastrophic. No formal completed misconduct determination had been officially finalized at the exact time of the personnel actions. Patel finally confessed, the words hanging like a dark cloud over his tenure. Jamie Raskin calmly, methodically closed his manila folder. He did not speak for a long, heavy moment. Then, he looked up and stared directly into the bank of television cameras, exactly the masterful way the most skilled, historically aware congressional questioners look at cameras when they've just flawlessly established a devastating, undeniable fact for the official record that they want the entire watching country to understand is now permanently etched in American history. There was no formal finding. There was no completed administrative review. There was absolutely, unequivocally, no legal determination of wrongdoing. Patel, acting out of pure, unadulterated anger, fired them on the exact same day he found out they had legally, routinely subpoenaed his phone records. Raskin gathered his neatly stacked papers slowly, projecting an aura of total victory. Director Patel, you sit here today and describe the completely lawful, routine subpoena of your basic call log as outrageous. Yet, the FBI Agents Association, the very people who do the hard work of protecting this country every single day, described your unprecedented, retaliatory response to that simple call log as an action that is putting this entire nation at significantly greater risk. Raskin then slowly stood up from his leather chair. It was that rare, physically commanding standing posture that clearly signifies to everyone in the room that what follows is no longer a question meant to elicit information, but a damning, conclusive statement meant purely for the unforgiving historical record. I will simply note for the record that the highly trained, veteran agents you fired, the ones you abruptly terminated without a single shred of any misconduct findings, the brave ones who appropriately and legally used a standard federal grand jury subpoena to obtain a basic, completely routine phone log as part of a completely legitimate, authorized federal criminal investigation, those very dedicated agents are the exact specific people the FBI Agents Association says kept this country safe from our deadliest adversaries. And you fired every single one of them simply because they dared to keep a legal, authorized record of your phone calls. He looked down at Patel one final, dismissive time. I have absolutely no further questions for this witness, Mr. Chairman, but the congressional record now permanently and undeniably has your answer. The hearing, technically, painstakingly, continued for another 40 grueling minutes after that brutal, decisive exchange, and various other committee members took their turns to ask their respective, highly partisan questions. Patel slowly, painfully managed to recover his typical, polished speaking cadence by small degrees as he fielded softer questions from allies, but the catastrophic damage to his core narrative was irrevocably and permanently done. Those agonizing 18 seconds of deafening, televised silence following the ultimate yes or no question, those four devastating, legally binding words, no formal misconduct, determination, and Raskin's incredibly powerful, perfectly delivered closing statement were already being clipped, shared, and going massively viral across the globe as the singular, defining moment of the hearing, long before the chairman's wooden gavel even fell to adjourn the session. Make sure you hit subscribe to the channel right now and stay tuned, because the official FBI Agents Association has already officially filed a massive, completely separate legal challenge regarding these unprecedented, likely illegal firings. And the very first highly anticipated court hearing in that absolute blockbuster legal case is scheduled to take place in exactly 3 short weeks. I will be right here covering every single major legal twist, turn, and development as it happens. Please share this video everywhere you possibly can to get the truth out. 8 precise words. 18 excruciating seconds of silence. No formal finding of misconduct whatsoever. And the sitting FBI director, a man who loudly and continuously called the standard legal review of his own phone records outrageous, simply and undeniably cannot explain to the American people why the dedicated, patriotic agents who legally subpoenaed them deserve to lose their entire distinguished careers.